Recorded live.
Good evening. Welcome to Rich Vernadeau's Daily Talk, Researcher 135's Community Call on www.talkshow.com. On tonight's show, we're going to be dealing with a very interesting case, a murder-suicide of a couple of people that I was personally acquainted with. This happened some time back. I'd like for you to hear a selection, a comment that Michael made at the discussion which he started a year before the event, which we will be discussing tonight.
Her soul consciousness may have had enough power to say, okay, this reality is a bunch of blase nonsense. We're going to go on to something else right now. No, it's just like dying or passing, which I love that word too. All right. In other words, my thing is going to be different than everybody else's death. Whether or not I know what it is just for me. Some people can experience their own death in the here and now because they can consciously walk into, at any time they want to, another reality. In other words, it's another reality.
1 year before the murder-suicide, that was Michael's voice at the group. And he was talking about the way I look at it, if it was tomorrow, I'd go to sleep, I'd be ready. My death is going to be different to everybody else's death. Some people can experience their own death in the here and now. It was about 4:30 on the afternoon of Tuesday, September 8, 1981. The two children, boys 11 and 6 years old, walked home from school after getting off the school bus and seeing their mother's car was back in the driveway. Catherine had been gone to Kentucky for 5 weeks and had arrived back Monday, September the 7th, Labor Day night. Michael had already gotten home from Dallas on Friday. When the children came in and discovered the horrifying scene, they immediately called their grandmother, Catherine's mother. The scene was shocking. Catherine was on the bed, 2 .22 caliber rifle shots to her head. Seated next to the bed, leaning against the dresser, was the body of Michael, who had apparently committed suicide by shooting himself in the head after killing Catherine. In the kitchen, a strange occult symbol was done on the tabletop. Michael had drawn a pyramid with an eye hovering over it, with a man and woman holding hands walking down a pathway toward a dark door in the front of the pyramid. Below the pyramid were written these words: life, death, and dying. A number of occult and mystical books from Michael's mass library of esoteric literature was nearby. That's the scene. And we have a caller, I see, from Illinois. Good evening.
Hi, Rich. I just wanted to ask, when and how did Michael and Catherine meet?
They met in Dallas in the Metroplex whenever they were working together at Level or Blinds. And they developed a relationship at that time in the late 70s and began living together. One apartment after another. They were in more than one place. And then they ended up coming to moving out into the country where the incident, the murder-suicide occurred. They had moved out there by early 1980, and the event itself happened in September of 81.
I see. Were they drug takers?
Well, I think to some extent, because that was the culture at the time, definitely Michael had experimented with Quaaludes at least, probably LSD. Of course, the marijuana was an occasional thing that they both used.
And had you told me before that he had been in the service?
Oh, yes. Michael was a Vietnam vet. He saw a lot of bloody action. He lost a lot of friends and comrades. He was in the Battle of Hill 444, which took 70% American casualties. It was a very traumatic experience for Michael, and he told a lot of stories about his experiences in Vietnam. I think probably like most Vietnamese veterans, he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, perhaps without even realizing it, without even knowing it. One of the experiences that he related to me, he said that in Vietnam, his platoon had marched into a village where one of the bars had been serving ground-up glass, which had killed one of their guys. The bartender was a female, and they turned her upside down and hung her until she died. So that's the type of stuff that he went through while in Vietnam.
That's just horrific. That's got to do something to the mind.
Oh, absolutely. You know that it would. There was another incident where he was with a platoon that, with a Sherman tank, burst into a Buddhist monastery, which had a huge golden gilded statue of a Buddha in front of it. And there were these monks in there that were protesting the war. And the American Sherman tank, of course, it took them a little while to knock down these big, huge doors. And they got in there at that time, and obviously some of the monks died when the doors collapsed in on them. And some of them were still sitting in a meditative position while their comrades were buried underneath the big, huge doors that had caved in on them.
Just horrific. And I just kind of wonder, I'm not a huge supporter of war, and I just kind of wonder if an awful lot of the servicemen that, they do experience the PTSD, or however it is you say that.
Yeah, PTSD, yes.
That they're trained to kill. And after they come out of war, that must be something that is hard to maybe not do, or not be able to control, is that killing instinct, plus the training that they've had that's just basically turned them into killers. And I just kind of wonder if that does happen at times, that because of what they did in the service, it adds to their more aggression towards people and places and situations.
I think that's very, very plausible. And one of the things which Michael had discussed from time to time in the discussion group meetings at the discussion group which he started and which I attended and Catherine attended and a number of other people as well, he talks about feeling that he had been followed by a pattern of death. One of the things that he talked about was that in Fort Worth in 1962, his lovely blonde first wife and small daughter were killed when a drunk driver ran a red light and plowed into their car. This lovely first wife looked a great deal like Catherine, and at times Michael spoke as if Catherine was the return of this first wife. Michael mentioned that the Fort Worth newspaper had taken pictures of the total Cadillac and mentioned that the drunk had simply walked away from the crash and was not found for several days. The man was very prominent, very wealthy. He got away with it. Nothing was done at that time. But Michael pointed out that years later, the man died an agonizing death from stomach cancer. And, of course, Michael felt that was, the karmatic consequences of what had happened, that the guy got his own punishment later on.
Mm-hmm.
And I see we have a caller from Northeast Texas. Good evening, Northeast Texas.
Yeah, am I on?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very interested in this topic.
Great. If you've got a question or a comment you'd like to weigh in with, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, I just wondered if you think that the culture had anything to do with these murder-suicides we've been seeing in the last few decades.
Sure. I think there's absolutely got to be a societal, cultural connection. I think the explosion of violence since World War II, whether we're talking about mass murders or serial killers or whatever, I think they're reflective and indicative of a chaos within the culture, a disjointedness. Obviously, some of it has to be environmentally influenced in terms of the way kids are raised, in terms of the experiences people have, good and bad, which lead to their behavior. You know, everybody's responsible for their own actions, but there can be outside influences which push them in one direction or another. Obviously, drugs can be a very negative influence. So much of what we're seeing, I think, is reflective of sort of a deterioration in American culture since World War II. Yes.
Nihilism, no God, godless society.
Uh-huh.
Not particularly, and I'm not naming any God, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever, but I think that people without a God, in a culture, a whole culture is without a God, then those who are at risk, who would be served by having a God or some direction in life, those who are at risk would be more susceptible to behavior like this in a nihilistic society, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, and I think that the moral fabric of the country is gone, and so much of that, of course, broken homes and an increased divorce rate. I think there's a lot of contributing factors that can be looked at that all work together.
And he was adopted, right?
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Several stories circulated concerning the circumstances of Michael's real parentage. One version was that his adopted father had actually fathered him illegitimately by a girl and then arranged to adopt Michael. Another version was that his adopted mother had actually given birth to him. She went to elaborate lengths telling stories of how she physically gave birth to Michael. Michael himself went to obsessive lengths to try to discover his real parentage. It took an enormous amount of his time, and he seemed to keep running into dead ends. He did at one point feel that he might have located his real parents, and he had an interesting incident when he was a child living in Wichita Falls, in which a woman came to the schoolyard, and he didn't know who she was, but she told him, she said, "No, but I know you."
Yeah, that was...
Young adopted Michael began thinking about it, and he decided that she may have been his real mother, who had given him up. Probably. Michael went home and asked his adopted father about the woman and about certain pictures around the house which he had seen, which were probably his real parents. But the adopted father refused to tell Michael anything, and soon afterwards the photograph disappeared.
Was he raised with any other children, any younger children?
None that I'm aware of, no. He was basically an only child within that adopted environment.
That has to be hard on a child and even, an adult in later years to not know really who you are or where you come from.
Exactly right.
And it causes a certain level of insecurity, which of course can manifest itself in many different ways. There have been observations made concerning Michael and Catherine's relationship. Some of the characteristics of it included an almost obsessive concern on Michael's part about Catherine's whereabouts and her well-being. This, of course, was matched in equal intensity by an almost deliberate willfulness and independence on Catherine's part to go wherever she pleased without even informing Michael or the children at times. Catherine was very independent and stubborn and very free-willed, and he couldn't keep her there. She wanted to go somewhere, she was going to go when she wanted. Michael became very agitated and upset whenever Catherine was gone. He became worried about where she was, whether or not she was safe, when she was going to come back, and when she would be back. And Michael once stated quite accurately, Catherine does what Catherine wants.
And it sounds like he was a very controlling person.
Oh, absolutely. One of the observations that was made by a psychologist after the event had occurred, and which I agree with these comments concerning Michael. He viewed Catherine as a possession. He could be selfish. He apparently had a charismatic hold over people. He felt a lifetime of hurt, and Catherine was hurting him much more than she realized by leaving him for extended periods of time. Because of his personality, he wanted to be in charge or in control of situations. For example, the discussion group. Catherine was everything to him. Lover, friend, she was his whole life.
I'm looking at a picture you've got on your website. I'm looking at a picture you've got that shows him body language shows that he is very possessive and domineering over her.
And you're determining that from the body language exhibited in the picture?
Right. It looks to me like
uh-huh.
It looks to me like they both suffered from insecure attachment in childhood.
Uh-huh.
They were desperately searching for that for what they didn't get, what they did not get when they needed it in infancy. That's searching for attachment to somebody.
Yeah. The possessiveness and jealousy which he exhibited toward Catherine could stem from and manifest from this emotional deprivation that he experienced in childhood, correct?
How did he react when she would go off and then come return? What was his reaction on her return?
Usually on her return, he would become very angry, and he would say, "I'm leaving, Catherine," and he would then get in the car and drive off.
That's avoidant. That's avoidant attachment style right there. When the mother doesn't when the infant can't depend on the mother, whether she's going to be there, whether she's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They develop an avoidant attachment style. In other words, when she does come back, they're mad. They're not glad to see her. They're mad.
Yeah. He would manifest anger whenever Catherine would return after an extended period of time.
He picked that. That was his way he learned how to survive as an infant. Learned to get mad when she came back, and so that carries over. Your attachment style, whatever attachment style you have, carries over into adulthood.
And keep in mind that the precipitating event, which led to the murder-suicide, as far as Michael's response goes, was the decision Catherine had made to leave him. Catherine had been at her sister's in Kentucky for 5 weeks and was simply coming back that Labor Day evening to rest up and to get all of her stuff. She was going to leave and go back to Kentucky and stay with her sister. And on the telephone, before Catherine returned from Kentucky, she had talked to Michael on the phone that weekend, and she asked him what he wanted more than anything else. And instead of telling her, "Well, I want you back," Michael told her that he wanted to be the greatest spiritual teacher in the world. Later that day, he told Catherine's mother, "That was the wrong thing to say. I should have told Catherine that I wanted her back." At any rate, that's one of the conversations.